So welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Today we're going to be talking about the rise of Hitler and fascism in Germany. And so to start, I want to first go over some of the structures and the outline of the Weimar Republic. The period of time after World War I, so from 1919 to the rise of Hitler in 1933, is sort of going to mirror the same outline as international peace, that there is initial crisis in the war during that time period until 1923. From 1923 to the stock market crash, really by 1930, there's hopeful years within Germany. And then really by 1930, the Great Depression hits Germany very hard, and it's another major crisis point, which enables the rise of Hitler by 1933. So we sort of see this three phases of this, 15-year period. And so we're going to look at all the different factors. But just to remember, immediately after World War I, in 1919 Germany, there were many economic problems related to the war and the defeat. There was huge unemployment after the war, lots of territory that was lost, that really hurt the economy of Germany, lost control of territories, they lost their colonies, they also lost some important ports in cities like Danzig. And then the inflation of the 1920s, caused by France's attempts to collect reparations, really makes the government of Germany, the Weimar leaders, appear to be weak because they can't solve these problems. So we're seeing many different, a confluence of factors that are all going to be contributing to this. The Weimar government itself it was designed to purposely be weak. Germany's coming out of having a Kaiser who was centralized, all-important, all-powerful, and now it's this more fragmented state where we have many different bodies and you elect into different ways. And democracies, as we talked about earlier, are hard. They're really hard to get things done with. And this Weimar Republic in particular, the capital is in Weimar instead of in Germany itself. It's like in Berlin. It's not a solid ground. It was a democratic constitution set up in 1919. It was primarily created and designed by people who were of socialist leaning or the bourgeoisie, so the middle class elite. And so it was an interesting combination. It ignored the conservative groups altogether. It did provide for some really good liberal reforms. The Weimar Republic is considered to be one of the most liberal of governments at the time. It provided for a parliamentary government with ministerial responsibilities to the Diet, equal suffrage for all, including women. So there was no wealth expectation. There was no amount of land ownership or any kind of tax you had to pay to be able to vote. All men and women above, I believe, the age 18 could vote in the Weimar Republic, along with really guaranteeing a lot of civil rights in this country that they had never had before. The first president of the Weimar Republic is going to be a socialist. His name was Friedrich Ebert. And because he was a socialist, we have oppositions from both other sides, really making the republic very weak. So just to go over some of the structure, right? You'll be president for 7 years. The president appoints the chancellor. Ebert was the first president from 1919 to 1925, and then Hindenburg becomes the president from 1925 to 1934. Hindenburg and Ebert were like polar opposites. Ebert was he was a socialist, right? Much more liberal-minded. Hindenburg was from the old military guard, much more conservative. And so we're seeing by 1925 sort of a resentment towards this old way and a new wave. Then the chancellor sort of does run the parliament itself. Gustav Stresemann is going to be the most famous of those, and he's actually able to usher in a period of peace and prosperity within Germany. That's the golden years is under Stresemann. And then the legislature itself, it's a two-house legislature. There's the Reichstag, which is representing the popular vote there, and they are allowed to. And then we have the Reichsrat. I'm going to confuse myself now. The Reichsrat, the former Bundesrat, along with the Reichstag, which is representing the popular vote. There you go. I made that edit just before coming on here. Sorry. So in this time, we have a few different political extremist groups. There are many different politics within Germany and lots of different parties. This tradition has still carried on to today, where in order to get elected into Germany, you actually have to make different coalition governments. There's many parties, so no one party ever wins the majority. And so instead you have many, many different political parties, and some which are on the extreme. So I want to go over today some of the different ideas from the different political parties and ideologies. So on the far left, you have the Spartacists, who are your Bolsheviks. They are the ones who hoped to turn Germany into a communist state. Actually, in 1918, they were part of the group that was leading an uprising against the Kaiser. They were hoping to follow in the Soviet Union's footsteps under Lenin, and lead a Bolshevik revolution within Germany itself. But they were put down. They will eventually become the Communist Party, or the KPD. So that's the party there on your left, right, where you see the worker standing over all the other definitely bourgeois members in their top hats, the shiny black top hats. Also on the left, you have a group called the New Democratic Party, or the SPD. And this is left-wing liberals. They're forming like a middle-class Republicans party. It's fairly moderate. They're still on the left-leaning, those Social Democrats. So in the chart on the left side here, they are like the lightest yellow color. On the far right, you have a group called the Volkisch, Volkisch. This group is very nationalistic, and they have using nationalism to unite the people, and talking about the Volk, the people themselves as this party in power, and German identity. They have very specific idea of what German identity should look like, though, and one of the foundations of their party is going to be anti-Semitism. To be German means to be a Protestant, to be a Christian, definitely not to be Jewish. And so anti-Semitism is sort of a foundational belief within the Volkisch Party. The Volkisch Party eventually becomes the NSDAP, which is the Nazi Party. It will eventually evolve to be the Nazi Party itself. Also on the right is a group called the People's Party. It's made up of many more moderate industrialists who are looking for still laissez-faire policies for personal property. So the idea of private property is important for them. Before World War I, they were like the national liberals, and they're going to be led by Stresemann. We also have nationalists, just straight up nationalist party on the right side, and they are your traditional Junkers, the old nobility of Germany, and the elite military members. And so we see lots of different factors here. Most interesting in terms of parties emerging after World War I is going to be a party called the Zentrum Party, and the Zentrum Party was created really in response to Bismarck's Kulturkampf when he was targeting Catholics. During that time, the Zentrum Party, Catholic identity in Germany started to become distinct when they felt threatened by Bismarck's policies. And out of that came this political party called Zentrum, which by the time after World War I, although it was always identified as the Catholic center, you did not have to be Catholic to be part of this party, but it was viewed as the most moderate of the different political parties. It was in the very middle of everything, and that's why it's called Zentrum. It's the middle. It will bridge the gap between all of these different political views and ideas. In this midst of sort of political weakness and chaos, many different political parties, many different ideas, I'd like to introduce the rise of Hitler himself and the beer hall push, which happens in 1923. So by 1920, we see a pattern of attempted coups on this Weimar Republic. A lot of youth in particular are unemployed. They don't have jobs. They're very disappointed with the outcome of the war. They feel unsatisfied. And so they start to stage different coups. In the midst of all of this, right, we have France occupying the Rhineland, demanding its reparation payments, taking a really harsh definition of that. And so Ebert, the president, is going to announce that a general strike on the people, refuse to work, right, as a way of resisting France. And this creates a terrible crisis, right? A general strike is going to just paralyze Germany. Nothing is getting produced. Nothing is getting sold or bought. The economy just completely comes to a crushing halt. And this is when, Ebert's also printing the money as another form of resistance against France. But that also means that the economy of Germany gets completely destroyed with hyperinflation. So 1923 is this real crisis point in Germany in particular. The country in complete crisis, Stresemann steps in and becomes chancellor in the fall of 1923. And when Strussmann comes into power, he immediately declares that we need to end that passive resistance. We need to end the general strike. We need to start cooperating with France. We need to negotiate with France, start producing goods, and stop printing all this money. We need to address that. And he fixes the hyperinflation by introducing the new mark, the Deutschmark. And so all of these different things are helping address the economy and help fix it. But 1923 still is a time when the people are not trusting their government, right? Strussmann's just coming into power, trying to address these problems. And so there's a lot of different attempted coups. And one of them happens in Munich. It's called the Beer Hall Putsch, and it's led by Hitler. It was in Bavaria, which is in southern Germany. That's where Munich is. It starts in the city of Munich. A small group of ultranationalists, the Nazis, they are going to attempt this march from Munich to Weimar to seize the government, to take over the government. Hitler himself, just a bit of background, he was born in Austria, raised in Linz, also in Austria. 19 years old, he moves to Vienna to go to art school, as you might know. In 1913, he moves to Munich without any real purpose. And so in Hitler's own words, he says that World War I saved him. It gave him a purpose, gave him a role in life. That war was a really transformative moment for Hitler. He finally had a job, he had a place to go, payment. And so after World War I, he is disgusted by this new government, sort of viewing it as a shame that they've gotten stabbed in the back. You know, that diktat piece, the diktat saying that Germany has to accept guilt for the war itself was, and the Weimar Republic were intolerable for Hitler's views. So in 1920, Hitler joins a right-wing extremist national group in Munich, the German Workers' Party, and that German Workers' Party is going to rename itself the National Socialist German Workers' Party, or Nazi, which is short for that, National Socialist German Workers' Party. He is a very great orator, great to make very great speeches, and he's able to gather new members with that. In addition to that, Hitler was very good at constructing an identity for people and a role, and these are former soldiers in particular who are joining him, people who identify and take pride in having that uniform to put on. And so he'll pass around pins and banners and uniforms and flags and newspapers, and he'll even create a subsidiary police force, a paramilitary force. It's called the SA, or the Stormtroopers, that helps develop this political party into a mass movement where people start to identify more so with this party than with the country itself, and it's a place to go, a way to belong. If you look at the symbolisms and the iconography of the Nazi Party, a lot of it is designed to look, even today when we talk about the rise of neo-Nazis and how they target youth and young boys, a lot of that is because these parties are designed to look sort of cool in a way. I'm using quotes, you can't see, but these symbols are supposed to seem attractive and neat and something that you would want to wear in a sleek way. And Hitler purposely did that, sort of to even ignore the actual policies, but to feel like you're a part of something bigger than yourself, sort of to blindly obey. So this beer hall push, anyway. So in 1923, Germany, Hitler meets in a beer hall. It actually still is around today. It's a little uncomfortable. You go there and they have a Oompa band playing, and it's a grand old time. And there's really no recognition of what happened in this space, in this building at all. Not a single sign. And you're sitting there, sort of watching everyone sort of have lots of merriment, and it's a little unsettling in a way to think about. But it was in one of many beer halls. Munich's famous for them, for their Oktoberfest, where Hitler is going to be, they step out of that beer hall as a military force ready to take on their coup, and they get arrested. Now, the coup was a complete failure. However, when Hitler is put on trial, he's tried for treason. He's tried for treason against the government. I mean, that's punishable by death. And instead, he is put in jail for, he was sentenced to 5 years, but served little over 1 year in prison. The judge had a lot of sympathy for him. He was a conservative himself, so he hated the Weimar Republic. This was a judge who was a judge from before World War I. And so a lot of people who were in positions of power undermined the Weimar Republic as it was because they didn't agree with its policies or politics. And so Hitler is an example of someone who benefited from a sympathetic judge who wanted to support his political ideas. While Hitler was in jail, he writes his book, Mein Kampf. Mein Kampf means my struggle, and in that book he sort of outlines his ideology. Now, at this time there's extreme German nationalism, an idea of anti-Semitism, anti-communism, and then he presents his theory of struggle according to social Darwinist principles, that there's the survival of the fittest. In order to have that survival of the fittest, though, you need war, you need conflict, and that superior nations, those that win, then have a right, a privilege, a right, a destiny to have the land that they're able to easily defeat over. And so this is his justification for a concept called Lebensraum. Lebensraum is the idea of needing living space. He argued that Germany was way too overcrowded as it is, the people. Particularly Germany cannot support itself, feed its people independently. And therefore Germany needed to take over additional land in order to feed the people that live within its country. So it was an argument of Lebensraum. His justification for it should sound somewhat familiar. It was really grounded in the idea of manifest destiny that we have in the United States, that idea that we were destined to take over from one ocean to the next, and sort of ignoring the fact that people were actually living there, and there were cultures and civilizations that lived across the United States, which we have since, taken over and pushed out. And so for Germany, that's how they were viewing a place like Poland in Eastern Europe as land that was destined for their grabbing, rather than actually considering the people that were living there. The beer hall push itself was a major turning point in terms of the rise of Hitler and the Nazi Party, because the failure of it made them stop trying to overthrow the government itself. They recognized they're not going to be able to overthrow the government, so instead they're going to try and work within this republic and then undermine it from within. So instead of focusing on the ideas of the people, instead they are going to focus on loyalty to the Führer, to Hitler, and sort of really create an atmosphere of excitement, an atmosphere of political engagement, where people feel really like they're making a change, and then undermining that republic itself. So the party itself, in terms of membership, was very youthful. Most members were actually under the age of 30, and they were men. And so this gave them an atmosphere of action, and rather than debate, which really worked to garner support. Let's stop talking about ideas, and instead let's do. Let's just keep moving forward. By 1929, the Nazi Party itself is going to be shifting its focus where they're appealing, away from urban centers, and trying to pull from workers and socialists and communists, instead moving towards the middle class votes in small towns and rural areas, appealing to the quote unquote Volk, right? Trying to appeal to that new group. So with that, we have the rise of sort of Hitler, and then the Hitler at the time, though, was still a small group, a small movement within the area, the region of Bavaria and southern Germany. Just as an aside, Bavaria is still to this day a fairly unique culture that's distinct from the rest of Germany. It's there that you have like those castles that Disney World is based on, and they're the ones that wear the lederhosen and dirndls that you sort of think of when you think of Germany. I was reading an article a few years ago that described Bavaria as like the Texas of Germany. That there's a much more conservative wing, and traditions are really important in that area, and it's sort of also though having its separate identity from the rest of the country in a way. So from 1924 to 1929 is marked the golden age of the Weimar Republic. So once the hyperinflation crisis was over, we have this period of time where it looks like the Weimar Republic might be able to recover. And during this time, the Nazi Party was a nothing party, just small scale. Some local towns, villages, some urban centers are supporting them, but it was not a widespread group. If you look at the elections here, you can see it really was not. In 1928, it was barely a blip of a political support. So in this period of time from 1924 to 1929 was this time of the real potential for the Weimar Republic. And so I have in the notes area a video that I'd like you to pause this one and watch the YouTube link for. It's going to outline sort of what happened during this time and why they were able to achieve it. But it connects back to the idea of the Dawes Plan and Treaty of Locarno and all those other things. Okay. But then the Great Depression hits. And the Great Depression hits Germany horrifically. The unemployment was 4.3 million in 1932 and 6 million by the winter of 1932. And radical solutions start to sound really attractive by that time. By 1930, the chancellor at the time, his name was Brüning, he was unable to have any kind of parliamentary majority in the Reichstag. And so he actually needed Hindenburg, the conservative president at the time, to make emergency decrees over and over again in order to be able to make any kind of move, to make any kind of passage occur. So the government was unable to respond to the Depression because of all of its political diversity. And if you can look in the year 1930, how many different political parties had seats within the Reichstag. Hindenburg himself was a monarchist man, a traditional, he was a military man, and so democracy was already dying by 1930, even before Hitler was becoming chancellor. In 1933, Hindenburg chose Hitler to be chancellor, really from a lot of pressure under industrialists, the landed aristocrats, the military, and the bureaucrats, because Hitler's policies, the Nazi Party, was strictly anti-socialist. And so at the time, if you're looking at the voting results, it really started to become, do you want socialism or do you want the Nazi Party? And so for Hindenburg, it's sort of viewed as the best option would be to have Hitler come into power. Hitler had the mass support to create a right-wing authoritarian government that would save their positions from any kind of communist takeover. The people who appointed him, Hindenburg and the other conservatives, assumed that they would be able to control Hitler. The Nazi Party leaders, though, were then placed into key different government positions. So, for example, Goering, the minister of was given the position of Minister of the Interior, and the head of police in Prussia. And he is going to purge the whole police in that region, in Prussia, which is where Berlin is, and in northern areas of Germany, of any police who are not Nazis. And he starts with then the Nazis are in the police force, so then they legitimize Nazi terror. And so those acts go hand in hand. By February 27, 1933, the Reichstag building is set on fire. Some background about the question of how this happened. It's believed that the fire was started on purpose. It was an act of arson, and the fire was brought through a tunnel that connected the Reichstag building to a building across the street. And the building across the street was the offices of Goering and the Ministry of the Interior. Despite that evidence, Hitler and the media blame it on the communists. And so the communists get blamed for setting this building on fire, for being anarchists, trying to upset the government, trying to overturn the Weimar Republic. And so Hitler convinces Hindenburg to give the government emergency powers. And so once those are declared, all basic rights of citizens for the duration of the emergency are suspended. And so the Nazi Party then, who are the police force, are then able to arrest and imprison anyone who's against them, such as such as the Communist Party. And so by the end of 1933, you see that Hitler is the only political party. Nazis are the only political party that's able to be a member of the Reichstag because of those emergency powers. I'm getting a little bit too ahead of myself, though, because March 5th, 1933, the Nazis still do not have absolute majority in the Reichstag. So the Nazis made an amendment to the Constitution called the Enabling Act, which dispensed any kind of constitutional form for 4 years. So that way the government can issue laws to fix the country. And it passed... It passed. Only the Social Democrats, who were still present in the Reichstag, opposed Hitler. Every other political party ended up supporting Hitler, which virtually made Hitler himself have total power. So Hitler became a dictator appointed by the parliament. The parliament itself elected or voted to allow Hitler to become dictator for 4 years. In July 1933, the Nazis became the only legal party in Germany. All other political parties were illegal. And they established the Gestapo, or the secret state police. It was formally established. They set up wiretap spying, private correspondence. The Big Brother really was fully entrenched within Germany. In June 1934, there's an event called the Night of the Long Knives, which was a purge of the stormtroopers. What had happened was Ernst Röhm was originally a partner to Hitler, and who, like Hitler, had sort of helped mobilize the Nazi Party into power. And he was the one who was in charge of the stormtroopers, or the SA, the brown shirts. And so he started, though, by 1934 to speak against Hitler. He saw Hitler himself sort of getting too much power and centralizing power under himself to not be trustworthy. And so what Röhm wanted to do was to replace the traditional army with this SA and sort of make the Nazis more in power, but not just Hitler. And so in June 1934, there was a massive purge of all of the stormtroopers and that had supported Röhm. And what this did for Hitler, was a smart move on multiple ends, is that he is eliminating any opposition within his own party, but he's also now gaining the loyalty of people who originally were very hesitant of him, the military and the army. They now see that Hitler does not look to replace the traditional German army, which was a source of so much German pride, and so much of its culture up until that point was grounded in this military. Instead of looking to replace it with this new group, he's supporting it and protecting it. And so from this point onward, when we talk about Germany and the Nazis, you almost have two different worlds. You have the German army, and then you have this other group of Nazi military, paramilitary force. And so at times they're going to be interwoven, and at other times they're working sort of separately in two different worlds. And it's hard to say, when we look at things like events like the Holocaust, what was going on, who was doing what. Not every single person in the German military conducted crimes against humanity in terms of the Holocaust itself. A lot of those members were the Nazi SA troop members, the Einsatzgruppen. More complicated, much more nuanced. If we were in class, we would spend a lot more time unpacking this. So I just wanted to introduce that idea, that concept. But as a result of all of this, he's gaining greater support of the military. Then in August 1934, Hindenburg will die. And so there is a plebiscite, then a popular vote for Hitler, and he will then win the plebiscite, which will make him both president and chancellor of Germany. And so he then holds a plebiscite to change the title from president chancellor to two-name title to just being the Führer, to being the centralized dictator, to control all of it. And so Hitler, with this election, is going to declare the Third Reich, the Third Empire. The empire before this, the German Empire that was created in 1871, is the Second Empire. And the First Empire that he's recalling is that of really Charlemagne and Otto I, back with the early Holy Roman Empire, that was the original German Empire. So he's really recalling back to this medieval past, this legacy that doesn't quite line up. If you remember, I showed you about the Nazi party round, the rally grounds, in a previous podcast, and I was discussing, the challenge of figuring out what to do with it. It wasn't an accident that he chose Nuremberg to be the city for those Nazi party rally rounds. Nuremberg, along with the other areas in southern Bavaria, were key trading posts for the Hanseatic League, that old German trading route that would trade and exchange with Italy, and they were old medieval trading fairs cities as well. So they still have that medieval architecture, and they still, even to this day, are like really adorable towns and cities that have a specific aesthetic that Hitler would recognize as proper German, instead of the more modern tendencies. Hitler, some of his policies. One was this idea of Blut und Boden, blood and soil. Hitler's argument was that the people of German descent have the right to live on German soil. And therefore, any people who are of German descent, they're the only ones who should live on this soil. And that all German areas should be one area of land. And so he wanted to abandon any kind of traditional legal principles and substitution of the Volk justice. Hitler wanted to subordinate individual rights to a group right of the Volk, the people. And so there was a mystic sort of doctrine that surrounded all of Hitler's policies, which meant that whatever Hitler wanted was then German law, because Hitler knew what was right for the Volk, for the greater people of Germany, not for individuals. So no individual mattered anymore. Instead, the Volk it was Volk justice, the greater people's justice, and Hitler was then the interpreter of what that would look like. Once he's in power, there's also a lot of increased anti-Semitic propaganda and the gradual passage of the various Nuremberg laws, which will gradually revoke citizenship to those who were Jewish. The Nazi state, the goal for Hitler was to create the total state, an Aryan racial state that would dominate Europe and then possibly the world. He wanted to create different organizations that every single person was a member of some kind of group or organization, and where your entire life takes place there, to remove any kind of quote-unquote arbitrary will. And so your personal happiness gets put aside, and instead it's happiness for the state that matters. So we're losing our individual identity in the Nazi state and instead moving towards the identity of the country as a whole. In terms of the economy for Hitler, the goal was self-sufficiency, as I had mentioned prior. Germany itself, he wanted to create to be a self-sufficient state. And so in order to achieve that, Hitler did something called the Hunger Plan. And he prioritized food for the Aryan race in this exchange. I'm going to just show right now just a brief image. I'm going to move ahead. I find it fairly disturbing. But this Hunger Plan was the foundation for Hitler's practice for the final solution for the Holocaust. The reason why was to be able to sort of starve out those who are not Aryan and make them work and not feed them until their point of death. So all land that was available would be optimized for farming. And so we're going to see his policy of Lebensraum, right, to expand into these other areas, be able to gain more land for farming, along with the starvation plan, right, that we're going to force this labor to clear this land, to prepare it for farming, but actually not feed them themselves. They starve to death. He supported this Lebensraum policy that there's a need for more room to expand for farmland and a movement eastward. This network of small farms that he's going to try and guarantee sort of create are not always the most highly productive. So he's trying to industrialize the farm network as well to be able to make it more productive. Hitler does maintain private industries. And this is one area, just like how Mussolini, where it gets to be a blurred line of how much is this state command economy versus how much is this still independent capitalism. In order to run your own business, you had to be a member of the Nazi Party. And so in order to be, and the primary idea of being a Nazi Party member is that you are willing to serve the state instead of yourself. So although individuals still owned their own businesses, these businesses no longer had individual independence, right? Instead, they had to serve this general will. And so that you see a lot more government-sponsored industry and a lot of partnerships between the government and the people themselves. So I just, without even translating this this poster, you can see how the scientist and the worker are in alliance with our soldiers in the background, right? And that they're all working together for the common goal of the state, that all parts of society are working together. So public works themselves are sort of ways to help, and there's money and grants given to private companies to help sort of engage the economy during this time of the Great Depression, and all try to sort of be stimulus actions. Rearmament was the biggest stimulus package that Germany had at this time, and it was a real way for the economy to get started. And so rearmament did work to address the Depression in a great way, although it was actively ignoring the Treaty of Versailles and the restrictions that Hitler was told to be abiding by. But he's going to ignore it. Labor unions are going to still be able to exist, but they're all going to be state-run. So any labor union that exists is going to be run by the government. In terms of state terror, terror and ideology go hand in hand for Hitler and the Nazi Party. Terror using repression and murder, and then ideology all about this master race, the Aryan race, and indoctrinating racial ideology. And you see that with the use of the Hitler Youth, right? That they're coming into power. All churches, Catholic, Protestant, all churches come under the Nazi power, and they're owned and regulated by the government. And so there's agreements with the Pope there. There's also widespread propaganda. The Ministry of Propaganda under Joseph Goebbels, he's going to be passing, starting in 1935, those Nuremberg laws against Jews, removing their citizenship. They're no longer German citizens, which means they're stateless. They can't go anywhere, right? They lose their German citizenship. They lose anything. They also ban any intermarriage that becomes illegal. There's restrictions on what jobs you can have. There's also being forced to move to certain neighborhoods. So it's the start of the creation of the ghettos. These were passed very gradually, one after another, not all at once. And so it sort of made it not as shocking as they went along. And then Hitler also will revamp the entire legal system, where he'll appoint local governors by Nazi leadership in Berlin. He'll set up a program of coordination by these local governors, so they all align with the Nazi Party and leadership that's happening in Berlin. And he also creates these people's courts, the Volk Court for Volk justice, and people will be tried in special courts for treason, and they take over every organ of the government. So here you see, I just think this is really far-sighting. It's on the altar of the Nazis, this political cartoon, where it observes, back in the 19th century, a German writer wrote, "Where one book burns, one will soon burn people." And in 1933, we see the books being burned, and then later on the Nazi victims here. And this is only in 1933, May of 1933, so just months into Hitler becoming into power and getting elected. So one last brief note just to mention, and I'm sorry this podcast is going a little bit long. This is where we'll end, though, is the Spanish Civil War. And you have these notes. So I'm just going to mark here the significance of the Spanish Civil War itself, is that it was a practice ground for Hitler. And the other powers did not get involved. France and England did not bother really, truly getting involved in the Spanish Civil War. Instead, Hitler does. Soviet Union also does participate in this war. But it's an example of the British and French just strong desire to avoid conflict at all and at all costs. And with that, they're allowing for another fascist to come into power in Spain, allowing for the democratic parties to lose. And so this is a chance for Hitler to gain another alliance, right? Also to practice the air bombings. It's the first time that we're seeing the use of the planes for massive bombing attacks. And it represented a real testing ground for World War II and resulted in authoritarian rule in Spain from 1936 to the mid-1970s. It's actually the bombing of Guernica that creates one of the most famous paintings by Pablo Picasso. And so you might be familiar with this painting, this use of cubism to illustrate the terrors of the war. The scale of this is probably the thing for me that's most shocking. It is the size of a classroom. So I would love for you to take a moment to just really look at this picture, think about what kind of emotions are you seeing here, what might the message be, what about the use of color? Do you see any colors here? Where are they? Why is it missing? And just sort of to process it all together. All right, so with that, we'll stop there for today. Thank you so much for your time, and we'll chat soon. Take care. Bye.